For this week's video, I'm in beautiful Cancun, Mexico. Yeah, it's work related. Last year was the Copenhagen flop, so this year the UN opted for a refreshing change of pace by bringing their climate summit to the tropical wonderland that is Cancun, Mexico. And what goes on here? Well, there's a lot of talking, and a lot of meeting, and talking, and meeting, and sometimes they take meetings just to talk. So I'm out front of the Cancun Mess, where many of the events and seminars and panels are being held, and you go in there, and it looks almost exactly like a student science fair. You have people with their booths and their Bristol boards and their petitions, and it's a great time for all self-important people.
Every country has the right to develop, but we also have to make sure that money and support is there to ensure that clean technologies and green development is possible. That's absolutely essential for us.
I know it's for helping the decrease CO2, is that it?
Yes.
CO2 in the world. So I think basically we should support all the things like that. Otherwise, we're going to have problems with the warming, the global warming, and I just hope that this works.
Scientists are telling us that we need to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by a large amount very quickly.
Yes, see, reducing and ultimately stopping emissions is the name of the game. Even President Obama jumped aboard that bandwagon by touting his support for an aggressive initiative to reduce the United States emissions by 68% come 2050. It should be noted that that would actually have our emission levels back to where they were around 1905, a time when nearly no Americans had cars, dishwashers, washing machines, or electricity, and the average life expectancy was a ripe 47 years old. If you made it past childhood without being kicked by a horse, you were pretty much in the clear. Now see, while many Americans may see this as regressive, neo-environmentalists see that as progress for Mother Earth. But at least they do understand the sacrifices necessary to reduce the impact of climate change. Yes, adjustments and sacrifices like no longer congregating in cool, air-conditioned halls with refrigerators full of cold beer and popsicles. Okay, so clearly if these folks deem it acceptable to enjoy their own frozen treats, they can't be extremists, right? They would want us all to be reasonable, I'm sure. You've got some folks, like the respected head of the Tyndall Center for Climate Change, Professor Kevin Anderson, actually calling for the halting of economic growth in wealthy countries and government rationing like those in the 30s and 40s. Quote, "The Second World War and the concept of rationing is something that we need to seriously consider if we are to address the scale of the problem we face." Talk about messed up. But I'm sure the folks here in Cancun are far more reasonable and would call a guy out like that on his crazy talk. After all, they do eat popsicles. Would you support an initiative like rationing put forth by Professor Kevin Anderson?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I think it's, I don't know.
Huh? Even implement rationing like we saw in the 30s and 40s. Is that something that you think you would support?
Yes.
What?
I think it's a very complex theme, the climate change.
Just say no. The answer is no. Rationing? Really? These people are eating popsicles. Which also begs the question, how'd you get here?
We flew, but
All of us flew.
It's very long distance from Cancun to Mexico City, so you have to take a plane.
Oh, so you did fly?
Yes, so we had to fly 2 hours.
Yeah, no, I know. Apparently these folks have never heard of Skype. So millions of dollars and God knows how many tons of carbon emissions later, these folks congregate here in Cancun to talk about the buzzword of the day.
The Kyoto Protocol.
Kyoto Protocol.
Ah, yes, the Kyoto Protocol.
Kyoto Protocol.
The World Government Climate Bill that has everybody here all a Twitter. The thing is with the Kyoto Protocol,
Kyoto Protocol.
despite it being radically expensive, even if all nations signed it and obeyed it, its own supporters have admitted that it wouldn't do much to reduce the temperatures come target time. And that's assuming that all nations obey it. See, the European Union's target goal was to reduce its emissions by 8% below 1990 levels come 2012. Between the year 2000 and 2004, they saw their emissions rise by a level of 9%. On average. You compare that to the average rise of the American levels by 1.7%, despite us not being on board with the protocol.
Kyoto Protocol.
Because it's designed to hurt us economically more than them. But When all is said and done, renewable energy, come on, that's good for everybody, right? The fact is, there's a reason that we haven't switched to these supposed renewable energy resources. They're unreliable and often very expensive. Barack Obama himself said that under his cap-and-trade plan, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Companies would have to retrofit their operations, and those costs would be passed on to the consumer. Now, while higher gas prices and energy costs might seem like a mere nuisance to the UN delegates enjoying the resorts and spas of Cancun, for other people, the results can be deadly. I had the privilege of heading out to La Libertad, a small village in rural Mexico where people live without water or electricity. This lady welcomed us into her home and showed us how she was forced to cook for her family. See, this ironing board acts as a stove, with anything she can find to light underneath it acting as fuel. As a matter of fact, over 1.4 billion people still lack electricity in the world today, and over 3 billion still require solid fuel for cooking. The reason she couldn't use her gas stove is because cooking one pot of beans would use up her gas allotment for the week, and that's all she can afford. So she's forced to ration it wisely. She also, sadly, doesn't have enough money to send her youngest daughter to public school, so she teaches her at home. Suddenly, those necessarily skyrocketing energy rates that Barack Obama brags about take on a whole new meaning. They have Head and Shoulders here. So they will be dandruff-free, at least. Now, the organization that took me here, CFACT, helps provide batteries and solar panels to homes and schools in the neighborhood. I was lucky enough to visit one of them, and they invited us with open arms. I taught them such fine American customs as the high five, the Charleston, and the Carlton. Tell us here with all these climate talks, green energy and renewable energy, how do these bills and these initiatives affect third world countries like this, people truly trying to come out of poverty?
Well, I think one of the things that people should recognize right away is that people in the developing world don't think about these issues. It's eating or heating, and that's all they're interested in is eating. So for the most part, what you're looking at in countries like this or in villages like this are people just trying to make a living. Energy prices are terribly expensive. The people here work for very little money each day. If policies coming out of the Cancun conference go forward and energy is made more expensive, the people here will struggle mightily to try to lift themselves out of poverty. In the West, they talk about going to renewable energy, things like wind and solar. These things do drive up costs. They do cost jobs. They are expensive, not practical, and they make life very difficult and things more expensive. But here in the developing world, it can be catastrophic.
Well, that is true. Take into account that coal power costs about 7.8 cents per kilowatt hour, and compare that to the renewable wind energies coming in over at 12 cents. And it's easy to see why states with renewable energy mandates often end up paying an average of 40% more for their electricity. And while that may sound like a pain in the neck to Americans, for the children of La Libertad, it could mean the difference between affording school, clothes, or even food. Hey, maybe the Mexican government could have given those children the 60+ million that they actually spent on this conference. No, that's just crazy talk and wouldn't make headlines. But of course, that in a nutshell is how going green affects third world countries. They won't have the chance to pull themselves out of poverty as we have here in the New World. And with fewer and fewer countries being exempt from emission standards, it's going to become increasingly difficult. But see, the environmentalism movement today is pro-Mother Earth And human life is often seen as nothing more than a byproduct or a nuisance. So it's important to remember, well, going green may make us in North America feel warm and fuzzy, forcing it upon those who can't afford that privilege, well, to them it could be fatal. But I guess if these folks would rather die, then they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. It'd definitely be the green thing to do. This is orange papaya. I wanted mango orange.